There comes a moment when a nation must decide whether to bend or to rise, when silence becomes strength and alliances shift like tectonic plates beneath our feet. Today we witness one such moment. India has chosen a new direction, not out of anger, not out of fear, but out of unshakable resolve. This is not the end of trade. This is the beginning of independence. In the ever-shifting landscape of global politics and economics, the decision of India to decouple strategically from the United States marks not just a bold pivot, but a declaration of intent, an intent forged in the fires of past dependencies, present disillusionments, and future aspirations. For decades, India navigated a complex relationship with the United States, one that oscillated between cooperation and caution. Trade flourished, technology flowed, and diplomatic visits were dressed in smiles and signatures. Yet beneath that surface, there was always a growing tension, a realization that strategic alignment with a superpower comes with invisible strings. And those strings, when pulled, can throttle sovereignty. India's journey towards self-reliance, or Atmanirbharta, did not begin overnight. But recent events have pushed the country to move faster, harder, and with more resolve. With each sanction threat, with each tariff increase, and with every unilateral decision taken by Washington without consulting New Delhi, India began to ask, is this partnership or is it control? Over time, the imbalance became clearer. So is it control? Over time, the imbalance became clearer. American corporations wielded disproportionate influence over key Indian sectors, from tech to pharmaceuticals to defense procurement. While foreign investment enriched many industries, it also left them vulnerable to external shocks and policy shifts in faraway capitals. When India began to push back, tightening FDI norms, seeking to boost domestic manufacturing through schemes like PLI, production-linked incentives, and exploring alternative financial systems, it was met with resistance, not just from U.S. institutions, but from internal lobbies too, those who feared the wrath of a displeased Washington. Yet, India pressed on. Because strategic decoupling does not mean isolation. It means independence. It means choosing what's best for 1 billion people, not for a boardroom in Silicon Valley. In particular, for people, and like this decoupling became more urgent as geopolitical pressures mounted. Washington's increasingly transactional approach to foreign policy meant that even long-term partners were not spared scrutiny or punishment. India, with its nuanced stance on global conflicts and its refusal to blindly follow Western narratives, found itself caught in the crosshairs narratives, especially in the Russia-Ukraine war, was relentless. But India chose instead to prioritize its national interests. It continued buying oil from Russia. It strengthened its regional diplomacy. He refused to be drawn into Cold War binaries. And so the economic shift began. Quietly at first, diversifying supply chains, strengthening trade with Southeast Asia, reviving talks with Eurasian blocs, investing in digital infrastructure to reduce dependence on American tech giants, localizing data, building payment systems like UPI that could rival Western counterparts. These weren't just technical reforms. They were acts of economic sovereignty. And with every successful rollout, the idea of decoupling moved from ideal to reality. At the heart of this movement was a growing awareness among India's policymakers, dependency on any one power, especially one that operates with unpredictable internal politics, is a strategic risk. The Trump-Biden transition highlighted how quickly U.S. policy could swing, how allies could become afterthoughts overnight. India could no longer afford that vulnerability. It had to prepare for a world where every nation was for itself. And in such a world, hedging is not cowardice, it is wisdom. The symbolic move to reduce trade ties with the U.S. was not taken lightly. It followed years of trade imbalances, digital taxes disputes, visa policy frustrations, and the absence of a meaningful free trade agreement despite prolonged negotiations. America's rigidity in negotiations often left India with little room to maneuver. In contrast, nations like Russia and China offered pragmatic terms, resource-driven deals, infrastructure partnerships, energy agreements, all without the ideological baggage or conditions tied to human rights scores or democratic standards. Decoupling also meant reclaiming narrative control. For years, India's policies were judged through Western lenses, its democracy questioned, its policy scrutinized in op-eds written oceans away. But now, India no longer waits for validation. It charts its course based on what works for its people, its geography, and its civilizational priorities. It knows that real sovereignty includes the right to make mistakes and the right to learn from them on its own terms. Strategic decoupling is not about burning bridges. It's about building new ones with stronger foundations. It's about reducing asymmetries that leave a country exposed to the whims of foreign powers. For India, this means ending over-reliance on U.S. defense systems and exploring alternatives from Israel, France, and indigenous suppliers. It means rethinking educational and technological collaborations that often led to brain drain. It means creating platforms where Indian voices lead, not follow. Above all, it is about time. The time has come for India to stop being seen merely as a market for weapons, for apps, for services, and instead be recognized as a strategic force in its own right. A nation of over 1 billion people should not have to negotiate from the back foot. It should not have to wait for trade scraps or policy carve-outs from the world's largest economy. It must stand firmly and unapologetically on its own. In the wake of its strategic decoupling from the United States, India has begun forging a new economic path, one that leans toward the east rather than the west. The shifting geopolitical winds have not only encouraged this pivot, but made it necessary. As trust eroded between New Delhi and Washington, doors began to open in Moscow and Beijing. Not out of convenience, but out of shared strategic calculus. What once may have seemed unthinkable, a closer India, Russia, China economic triangle, is now emerging with quiet certainty. Russia, long a trusted partner, has become more essential than ever. With sanctions choking Moscow's trade routes to the west, the Kremlin turned to Asia, and India responded. Oil became the first currency of this bond. Despite international pressure, India ramped up its purchases of discounted Russian crude, refined it, and even exported some of it to markets that had sanctioned Moscow. This wasn't defiance for defiance's sake. It was pragmatism. Energy security is not a luxury. It is a lifeline for an economy as vast and hungry as India's. Russia understood that. And more importantly, it respected India's independence in making that choice. But energy was only the beginning. The trade in fertilizers, coal, and defense equipment soon followed. Ruble-rupee mechanisms began to bypass SWIFT, laying the groundwork for a financial ecosystem less vulnerable to U.S.-led sanctions. Joint ventures in agriculture, nuclear energy, and aerospace technologies are beginning to take shape away from Western scrutiny and strategic leverage. India's message was clear. Partnerships based on respect, not pressure, are welcome. China's case is more complex The two nations share not just a long and tense border, but centuries of rivalry, cooperation, and competition. The military tensions, especially along the line of actual control, are real and unresolved. But in the world of trade, realpolitik often trumps rivalry. Despite political mistrust, China remains India's largest trading partner. And as Western economies become increasingly protectionist and polarized, there's been a renewed drive to manage competition while extracting economic gains. India's trade with China is being recalibrated, not severed, while steps are being taken to reduce critical dependencies, especially in sectors like telecom, electronics, and pharmaceuticals. India is also increasing imports of industrial machinery, solar modules, and rare earth materials that are key to its transition toward green energy. This pragmatic engagement reflects maturity, not contradiction. It reflects India's realization that economic strength lies in balance, not in blind loyalty to any bloc. Multilateral formats like BRICS are also playing a more pronounced role. India, Russia, and China, despite their differing worldviews, are finding common ground in challenging the dollar-dominated trade order. The discussion around the BRICS currency or an alternative payment system isn't mere symbolism anymore. It's strategy, one that allows nations to trade freely without the constant threat of financial weaponization from the West. The push to settle trade in local currencies is slowly gaining traction, and India stands to benefit from being a key architect in this emerging architecture. Infrastructure development is another key domain. India's participation in the International North-South Transport Corridor, NISTC, a multimodal network connecting India to Central Asia, Russia, and beyond, has received renewed focus. By bypassing traditional Western-controlled shipping lanes, this corridor offers India not just trade efficiency, but strategic depth. Russia, isolated from Europe, needs new markets and partners. India, seeking autonomy and influence, needs alternative routes and alliances. The timing, however fragile, is opportune. Digital economy is yet another layer. Talks have already begun around cross-border payments, e-commerce, fintech, and cybersecurity protocols with Eurasian economies. India's UPI model and Russia's MII card system could someday be integrated or at least interoperable, giving consumers and businesses real alternatives to Visa, MasterCard, and Western payment infrastructure. These developments may still be in early stages, but they signal intent, and in geopolitics, intent shapes reality. Of course, this eastward shift is not without skepticism. Critics argue that aligning economically with authoritarian regimes like Russia and China may undermine India's democratic values or strategic independence. But India has shown time and again that engagement does not equal endorsement. It has engaged with the West without surrendering its autonomy, and it intends to do the same with the East. What is becoming increasingly evident is this. India no longer sees itself as a junior partner in the Western-dominated order. It envisions a multipolar world where New Delhi speaks for itself, negotiates on its own terms, and partners where its interests are met with mutual respect. Russia and China, for all their flaws, offer a platform where that vision can be tested and perhaps in time realized. India's deepening economic ties with these powers are not acts of desperation. They are decisions rooted in foresight. The world is realigning. Power is shifting. And India, by recalibrating its partnerships toward those who share or at least respect its sovereignty, is preparing to lead in a new world order that no longer revolves around a single sun. In an age when the levers of global trade are often pulled by a handful of powerful economies, India's decision to assert its national identity through trade autonomy marks a profound shift in how it engages with the world. This isn't just about tariffs or bilateral agreements. It's about redefining the very lens through which India is viewed on the global stage. For too long, trade policy was seen as a technical matter, confined to economists and diplomats. But now, in the wake of rising protectionism, shifting alliances, and weaponized dependencies, India is treating trade as what it truly is, a pillar of sovereignty. The trade autonomy does not imply self-imposed isolation. Instead, it signifies the freedom to choose partners, the ability to resist coercion, and the right to say no, even when the pressure is immense. For India, this journey began in earnest with its decision to walk away from the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, our CEP, in 2019. At the time, critics called it a missed opportunity, but India saw something else, an uneven playing field that could hollow out its manufacturing sector and increase its dependence on Chinese imports. The decision was a statement. India would no longer enter into deals that did not serve its long-term national interest, even if they carried global prestige. At the core of this strategy lies the idea that economic strength must reflect domestic priorities, not external validation. India's push for self-reliance through the Atmanirbhar Bharat campaign is not a retreat from globalization, but a recalibration of it. It's a refusal to be defined by the demands of international corporations, credit rating agencies, or trade organizations that seldom account for the socio-economic complexity of a billion-strong democracy. The policies that followed, such as import substitution in key sectors, public procurement reforms favoring local industry, and digital infrastructure tailored for Indian conditions, are not just economic adjustments. They are expressions of identity. This assertion of identity also takes place in the digital economy, where trade is no longer limited to goods, but extends to data, software, services, and algorithms. India's decision to regulate foreign tech companies more strictly, impose data localization norms, and invest in indigenous alternatives like ONDC, Open Network for Digital Commerce, is rooted in the belief that control over digital trade is as important as control over physical borders. If data is the new oil, India refuses to let foreign platforms extract it unchecked and monopolize value creation. In agriculture, another sensitive sector, India has taken firm stands in global forums. It has challenged the World Trade Organization's rules on public stockholding for food security, arguing that its farmers and food systems cannot be subjected to rules written by food surplus countries. When faced with backlash for imposing export bans on essential staples like wheat and rice, to stabilize domestic prices, India responded not with apology, but with clarity. Its first duty is to its people, not to speculative global markets. Energy trade, too, reflects this prioritization. India's decision to diversify its energy basket, buying from Russia despite Western disapproval, investing in long-term gas deals with Middle Eastern partners, and aggressively expanding its renewable energy capacity, is rooted in a desire to avoid the fate of nations held hostage by global price shocks or supply bottlenecks. Each contract, each pipeline, and each solar park is a brick in the wall of trade autonomy. This philosophy extends into defense and critical technologies. India is no longer content with being a buyer of last resort. It wants to design, develop, and export. The push for indigenous fighter jets, drones, and semiconductor fabs isn't just about technology. It's about narrative. It's about telling the world that India can build what it needs by its own hands, on its own land, and with its own vision. Trade autonomy also means resisting intellectual and cultural homogenization. The dominance of Western consumer brands, streaming platforms, and educational systems has long influenced Indian consumption patterns and aspirations. But there's a quiet resurgence of Indian-made brands, regional languages and tech platforms, local storytelling and OTT content, and research institutions aimed at solving distinctly Indian problems. These trends are subtle but powerful. They point to a future where trade doesn't dilute identity, it amplifies it. That is in asserting national identity through trade autonomy, India is also signaling something to the global South, that it is possible to engage with the world on your own terms, that development does not require dependency, that dignity is not a trade-off for investment. This makes India's path not just strategic, but symbolic. The world is beginning to take notice, not just of India's size of market potential, but of its refusal to be cornered or caricatured. Trade is no longer a matter of compliance or convenience. It is a mirror in which nations see who they are and what they stand for. And in that mirror, India is now seeing a reflection. It recognizes a reflection it can own and one it's no longer willing to negotiate away. As the tectonic plates of global geopolitics shift, Asia has emerged as the true battleground of influence, resources, and ideology. And in this contest, India is no longer content with playing a balancing role between giants. It is stepping forward to redefine the very power dynamics of the region. For decades, Asia's political and economic gravity seemed to orbit around two poles: China's aggressive rise and America's pivot toward the Indo-Pacific. But now, a third force is rising, not through conquest, coercion, or dependence, but through strategic clarity, economic scale, and civilizational confidence. That force is India. India's geographic position has always made it central to Asia, yet its posture was historically restrained, focused inward, caught in legacy conflicts, or cautiously non-alike. But recent developments have forced a reawakening. The growing assertiveness of China, from the South China Sea to the Himalayan border, has pushed India to reconsider its role, not as a regional spectator, but as a counterbalance in the unreliability of Western alliances, often reactive, transactional, and filtered through Euro-Atlantic priorities, has exposed the limits of looking west for regional leadership. What India offers is not a replica of Chinese state capitalism or American military projection. It offers an alternative model of leadership, one rooted in pluralism, democratic stability, demographic depth, and decentralized innovation. In a region where authoritarianism is increasingly normalized and smaller nations are often forced to choose sides, India's emergence as a stable, independent pole gives other Asian nations room to breathe. It doesn't seek vassals or colonies. It seeks partnerships, equal, pragmatic, and principle-driven. This redefinition starts with trade corridors and connectivity. India's renewed investment in regional projects like the International North-South Transport Corridor, the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, IMESC, and its outreach to ASEAN, Central Asia, and the Indian Ocean nations signals a long-term vision to create a web of influence that reduces Asia's over-reliance on Chinese infrastructure and American finance. The goal isn't to exclude others, but to provide options so that trade, investment, and security are not monopolized by a single hegemon. India's approach to defense diplomacy also plays a key role through initiatives like SAGAR, Security and Growth for All in the region, naval exercises such as Malabar, and defense exports to Southeast Asian and African countries, India is creating a security arc rooted in cooperation, not intimidation. This may be now the 5th largest in the world. It's increasingly active in patrolling choke points like the Strait of Malacca and the Gulf of Aden, ensuring open sea lanes, not just for itself, but for all nations that depend on them. Beyond hardware imports, India's soft power has quietly become one of its strongest tools in reshaping Asia. From Bollywood to yoga, from higher education to digital innovation, India's cultural and intellectual exports offer a vision of Asian modernity that is both rooted and open. Its thriving diaspora, from Singapore to the Gulf, further amplifies this influence, serving as both bridge and buffer in regional diplomacy. What makes India's redefinition of power dynamics distinct is its refusal to become a proxy. It maintains close ties with Russia while deepening engagement with the West. It trades with China while pushing back militarily and diplomatically when necessary. It builds coalitions like the Quad with Australia, Japan, and the US, yet also speaks with Iran, the UAE, and even the Taliban when regional stability demands it. This agility is not confusion, it is conviction. A conviction that Asia cannot be led by blocks or binaries, but by balance. This new role is being recognized, even if reluctantly, by traditional power centers. India is being courted not just for market access, but for mediation. Whether it's the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the Israel-Gaza escalation, or tensions in the Indo-Pacific, India's voice is increasingly sought, not because it echoes others, but because it offers an independent, credible perspective. That credibility is hard-won and fiercely protected. Internally, India is also preparing for this leadership. Massive investments in logistics, defense production, digital governance, and education are laying the groundwork for a state that can project not just power, but stability. It knows that global influence begins at home. A fractured nation cannot lead. A dependent economy cannot negotiate. And a borrowed voice cannot command respect. Redefining power dynamics in Asia is not about supplanting China or displacing the US. It's about refusing to be sidelined. It's about creating a third axis that doesn't mimic the models of Beijing or Washington, but reflects India's unique trajectory, one forged in resistance, nurtured by resilience, and now ready to lead not just with force, but with purpose.